So I'd like to start by asking you to contemplate, and I will answer these questions, two really complicated questions. The first is, can you improve the health of an entire community? The second question is, can you improve the mental health of an entire community? So my answer to the first question is absolutely. And I'll show you how we did it. A very hopeful story that can be an example to the rest of the country, right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My answer to the second question is, we're sure going to try, because of the momentum we have from our first set of projects around improving the health of an entire community. So in looking at the mental health of a community, we need to start with the brain. The brain is an incredibly complicated organism. When you take your vitamins in the morning, like you should, it's the brain that needs those vitamins to function the best. When you breathe the air, it's the brain that needs that oxygen the most. And when you have a great meal, it's the brain that needs the sugar from that meal to function the best as well. Our brains are influenced by many things. We're born with the DNA that we have. The RNA that reads that blueprint of DNA tells us what we're going to do and how we're going to interact with the world based off of how that RNA reads that DNA. The environment around us certainly influences us. Our own personal psychology, how we have formed patterns to work with the environment and the people around us. And then last, obviously, there comes events in our lives that we don't see coming that sometimes can dramatically alter how our brain functions. Now, when our brain is not doing well and has disease like amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or multiple sclerosis, we call those brain disorders. But not as often do we call schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and clinical depression as brain disorders, but they are. They are dysfunctions of the brain, just like multiple sclerosis. And when they're not doing well, unfortunately, bad things happen. We measure disability in the world by way of public health on two numbers. One are called DALYs, disability adjusted life years. The other is years of life of disability. When we look across the world, when we look in the United States, the highest ranking conditions that cause disability are actually our mental disorders. And it's because those mental disorders oftentimes start at age 18 or 19 or 20, and then that person is struggling with that mental illness for the rest of their lives. So it's many years of disability because it starts so early in life. Across the country, if you have a major mental disorder, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or a psychotic depression, you, on average, will die 20 years shorter than the average population. But here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you will die 29 years earlier than the average Tulsan right here in Oklahoma. We have 985,000 people in Oklahoma with major mental illness. It's a huge, huge number. We lead the country in percent of population with a serious mental illness. Fortunately, there are good things happening on the front of treatment of mental illness. We have good medications. We have good counseling. And we have new technologies that are coming on board that are very encouraging. TCMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, a powerful magnet waved over the brain, stimulates neuron activity and can be very helpful in treating depression. Vagal nerve stimulation, essentially a pacemaker that sits inside the chest and stimulates a nerve that runs from your heart deep into your brain, can be very helpful as far as stimulating brain activity and relieving depression. We have deep brain stimulation, which is essentially a pacemaker placed deep into the brain, as this diagram shows. And that pacemaker stimulates brain activity in the right places and can be very relieving for depression. We've even resorted to chemotherapy for depression. Right alongside patients receiving chemotherapy for their cancers are now patients receiving chemotherapy for their depressions, and those have shown to be very hopeful. The only problem I have with these treatments is they are placed and brought on board once the mental illness has started. Rarely do we think in the terms of my field, psychiatry, about preventing mental illness, but things are starting to change. Now, when we look at prevention in the field of medicine and public health, we think about it at 3 levels. The first is tertiary prevention. The illness has already started, and the treatment is there to try to prevent any further damage and disability. Secondary prevention is really focused on intervening as early as possible just when the symptoms are starting. So when somebody's cholesterol just starts increasing at a level that's a little bit dangerous, before that person even has heart disease, we start a statin to see if we can lower their cholesterol. But primary prevention is there to treat, or not treat, but to prevent the illness from even happening in the first place. That's why we have vaccines. We don't have smallpox in this world. We don't have polio in this world because we have vaccines. The treatment is applied before the infection ever begins, and you never have the infection because you have a vaccine on board. In the field of mental health, we are starting to think differently about prevention. I'm going to use 3 examples. The first is early psychosis, the second is clinical depression, and the third is post-traumatic stress. Now, early psychosis is code for me saying the first onset of schizophrenia. Most individuals who have schizophrenia, which is a condition where psychotic symptoms, delusions, and hallucinations are very prominent, most of the time it starts at about age 17 or 18. And unfortunately, as the years progress, the individual's functional abilities continue to steadily decline, and their ability to really take care of themselves is not near as strong as it was before. But there are new signs that if you apply very aggressive, assertive treatment early on, you can change that trajectory significantly. And these are called programs of assertive community treatment, and I was the psychiatrist for one of those teams. We saw patients every day. We made sure they took their medications. We supported them with their daily living activities. We were in the homes, and when they were homeless, we were on the streets with them. This is where I did get the nickname Psych on a Bike, because we were in a typical college town, and then there was nowhere to park. So we rode our bikes. And in fact, I was riding my bike one day around town. I had my backpack on. I was delivering medications to my patients, and a police officer thought I was dealing drugs. So there certainly is a downside to doing Psych on a Bike. But for the most part, our team and our students absolutely loved the work. And the patients got so much better. And the younger they were, the better they did in the program. It was highly effective. The second illness that we're starting to think differently about as far as prevention is clinical depression. If you have a clinical depression, your first episode, you have a 50% chance of having additional episodes in your life. If you have 2 clinical depression episodes, you have an 80% chance of having additional episodes in your life. In the past, we would treat the depression for a while and see what happens. But now what we're finding out is if you treat that first depression very well, with medications, with counseling, for a 2-year time period, you can prevent that person from ever having another depression. It's extraordinary. But we don't have a system that's designed like that. Instead, we wait and we wait and we wait, and we treat sometimes and we don't treat sometimes. But if we put that treatment out there up front, early and aggressive, we could change the course of clinical depression dramatically. So the last set of cases that I want to talk about is post-traumatic stress disorder. We certainly have post-traumatic stress disorder with some of our veterans coming back from the Middle East. We certainly have post-traumatic stress disorders from our adults who have had very difficult childhoods. I saw this firsthand when I was a clinician at the Tisdale Clinic in North Tulsa. Probably 80% of my patients had post-traumatic stress disorder. They struggled with depression, anxiety, and reliving the traumas that they went through. And it's difficult to treat because the depressions are very deep. The anxiety is very high. And the reliving of the experiences of their trauma is very hard for them to take. I saw an awful lot of post-traumatic stress disorder. But earlier this year, I saw new hope around post-traumatic stress disorder, and that came from our work in Israel. Now, Israel, as you would expect, is a country that has to deal with a fair amount of trauma. They are constantly at the risk of war, and terrorism is common in Israel as well. But the entire mental health system in Israel is designed around prevention of post-traumatic stress disorder when a trauma hits. And I saw this firsthand. When I was visiting in Jerusalem in January of this year, a terrorist attack did happen. The ambulances came to take care of the individuals that were physically injured. A second wave of ambulances came and took everyone else that witnessed the trauma or was close to the trauma and took them to a psychiatry emergency room. And lo and behold, if you intervene early, before any of the post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms kick in, you can actually prevent post-traumatic stress disorder. It's incredibly encouraging as far as taking away an illness that could be lifelong for these individuals. Now, back to my original question. Can you improve the health of an entire community? We actually did that here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In 2005, we started looking at neighborhood by neighborhood, what is the life expectancy? And much to our surprise, we saw a huge difference in life expectancy between North and South Tulsa. In fact, a 14-year difference in life expectancy between zip code 74126, which is where Booker T. Washington High School is, and where we are right now, 74104 zip code. 14 years difference in life expectancy. 40% of the people in Tulsa lived in North, East, and West Tulsa, but they only had access to 4% of the physicians. So we put out a plan to try to improve on that health disparity, that significant number. We put in new clinics, we put in new clinical programs, we added 37 doctors to the North Tulsa landscape, and then last year we remeasured how we did. And lo and behold, what was an average life expectancy in North Tulsa of 67 years had improved to 70 years in just a 10-year time period. 20,000 people now had 3 years longer to live. That's 60,000 years of life added in North Tulsa, and it's just an extraordinary number. In fact, we believe we're one of the very first communities to turn around their health disparities numbers like we did, and it's wonderful. And it has served as momentum for us to do it again around mental illness. When we go forward with our next planning for a citywide mental illness prevention initiative, you will see us aggressively going at early interventions for schizophrenia, as I described, early interventions for depression, and in fact, trying to prevent post-traumatic stress disorder before it even occurs. Thank you.